Chapter 5. Agatha. Intervention. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Buttocks in, child, and head up. You're waltzing, not scouring the floor for lost coins. Pollux barked at Agatha, his dog's head attached to a fat sheep's carcass. Wobbling around the Gold Tower ballroom, Pollux kept time with a willow stick as Agatha danced with the skeletal, red-haired altar boy who'd made a spectacle of himself at Tedros's coronation. "Don't rush, girl. 1, 2, 3. And stop gripping Willem like he's the last lifeboat out of Ooty. And smile, Agatha. This isn't a devil's haunt. Dance like this, and you'll be egged at your own wedding." "How are you even here?" Agatha growled, exasperated by her clumsy feet, her hapless partner, and the return of a prissy, scant-furred, snub-nosed canine she thought she'd left behind at school. Pollux was one half of a two-headed Cerberus who taught at the school for good and routinely lost the battle to use the body to his evil brother, Castor, which meant that whenever the two siblings were apart, Pollux had to find dead animals to attach his own head to, in this case, a rotting ewes. "Clarissa Dovey and I had a falling out," Pollux sniffed. "After Sophie was appointed Dean of Evil, I encouraged Clarissa to consider her own succession plan, just as her friend Lady Lesso did before her untimely death. As I explained to Dean Dovey, not only is she ripe in age, but it's time for good to have a fresh face at the fore, rather than one sagging past its prime. Of course, I pointed this out in the most tactful manner, but Clarissa ignored my many missives. Spine straight!" He swatted Willem with the stick, and the boy yelped. So I circulated a petition advocating for a mandatory retirement age, which Dean Dovey is well past. Naturally, I also nominated myself to replace her, but the shrew caught wind of the plan and had me fired. Pollux jabbed Agatha with his stick. Agatha snapped it in two and handed it back to him. "I see royal life has done nothing for your attitude." Pollux glowered. "Do you want your wedding to be as pathetic as the coronation? Imagine the royal rot, worst bride ever. Is that what you want, Agatha? More embarrassment?" Agatha's anger fizzled. "No." "Good. Because when Lady Gremlin heard of my travails at school, she brought me here to help you," said Pollux. "Specifically to teach dance, etiquette, and history in preparation for your wedding. She's even planning to make me your permanent steward, given your need for constant supervision." "Stewards are for kids," Agatha frowned. I won't need a steward once I'm officially queen. Only you can't be officially queen until Tedros is officially king. And right now, there's a sword hanging over that prospect." Pollux said, gazing through the ballroom window at Excalibur, sticking out from a blue tower balcony across the catwalk. 2 royal guards stood on either side. Pollux met Agatha's eyes. "So, until your dear unofficial king finds a way to pull that sword and seal his coronation, he has Lady Gremlin watching his every move, and you have me." Agatha nearly retched. Willem stepped hard on her toe. "Ow!" Agatha blared, knocking Willem into Pollux. "Who needs a wedding when you can have a circus?" Pollux scowled. After 2 more insufferable hours, Agatha moved to etiquette training, where she had to learn the names of 1,600 wedding guests from fat albums of portraits, with Pollux spraying her with stinging lemon juice every time she missed one. "For the last time, who is this?" Pollux crabbed, pointing at a hook-nosed face. "The Baron of Hodgebargy," Agatha said confidently. "Baroness! Baroness!" Pollux yelled. Agatha goggled at him. "That's a woman." By then she was dripping in lemon juice, still distracted by the sight of the sword in the balcony and unable to focus on anything else. Thankfully, the dog was interrupted by a courier crow with a message from Castor, which gave Agatha time to think. She'd always assumed that Tedros would pull Excalibur from the stone eventually. Sooner or later he'd jolt the blade free, or he'd figure out it was a clue to another puzzle or riddle, and then he'd solve it. She'd yet to consider that Tedros might never complete his father's coronation test. That the sword might stubbornly hang in that balcony for the rest of their lives, an eternal reminder of his failure. In which case, Tedros would never feel like a true king. He'd be trapped in this cycle of shame and isolation, so different from the gallant, open-hearted boy who'd once looked to her as his partner. "But what can I do to help him?" Agatha thought, gazing out the window at the rain. This wasn't like a trial by tale at school, where she could sneak in to save him. The sword was Tedros's test, and his alone. And yet, if she could help him somehow, wouldn't that fix everything? Agatha watched the storm gust across the castle. Something caught her eye through the rain. Agatha leaned over the windowsill to get a closer look. Across the catwalk, a boy had emerged onto the blue tower balcony in beige breeches and a grey hooded shirt, with the hood pulled over his head. He dismissed the guards and stood there all alone, drenched clothes clinging to his muscular frame. He peeked around to make sure no one was watching. Agatha ducked out of sight, before he began stretching each of his arms and shaking the tension out of his legs. Then, with a deep breath, he gripped Excalibur by the hilt and began to pull. The past 6 months, she'd watched Tedros do this every night. The same skulking onto the balcony, the same dismissing of the guards, the same diligent warm-up before he did battle with his father's sword. In the beginning, there had been swordmasters, blacksmiths, and ex-knights who coached him as he pulled, while Lady Gremlin looked on with narrowed eyes. Back then, the kingdom had been on the verge of war, with half the people supporting Tedros as king and half calling for his deposal. 6 months later, both sides had settled into a stagnant détente, the trapped sword a symbol of a king they were stuck with. Now there were no more coaches or watchful stewards. But still Tedros tried at the sword again and again. This was the first time Agatha had ever seen him during the day, though, for he'd always waited until the sun was down, when no one beyond the castle would be able to spot him. Perhaps he thought the storm was camouflage enough, or perhaps today he didn't care who saw him as he heaved and sweated, ripping at the blade from every angle. Excalibur didn't budge. This too was part of the routine, and Tedros would react to defeat like he had every day these past 6 months, by getting up at dawn and working out even harder, as if it was his strength that was failing him, and nothing else. Truth was, Agatha had never seen him so strong, ripped muscles stretching his shirt like he could shot-put a ship out of the ocean. He tore at the hilt with his new strength, bright blood streaking his palms, dripping down steel, before he threw back his head and let out a single, futile cry. Agatha closed her eyes and exhaled. When she opened them, he was looking right at her. She could hardly make out his face through the lashes of rain, but he was frozen still, gazing at her from beneath his hood. It was a dead, empty look, as if their shared past had been erased. As if this was the first time he'd ever seen her. "You won't learn the Empress of Putsy's name by mooning into the rain," a voice said. Agatha turned to see Pollux and his sheep corpse lording over her. He glared down at her soggy album, a mess of runny colours. "I know you're not one for ceremony or celebration or nice things, Agatha. But this is your wedding," said Pollux. "And I thought it was a leprechaun's ball," she said. "If you're going to treat this as a joke, then maybe I should call Lady Gremlin. Run to Mummy, like you always do. You are a sad little girl," Pollux retorted. Says the dog puppeting a sheep. Pollux sighed. I'm not here to torture you, Agatha. I'm here to help you get married. You have to care. I care, Agatha said quietly. You have to care, because it's a timeless tradition, and because it's the first time your people will see you as a queen. I care, Agatha repeated. You have to care because this is your legacy. I care, Agatha said. Do you? Said Pollux incredulously. Based on what I see, you don't. Tell me why I should believe you care about your wedding. Agatha looked at him. Because I need to remind Tedros that we were happy once. Sorrow softened Pollux's face. Agatha turned back to the rain, hoping her prince was still there. But all she could see were 2 guards, wiping his blood off a sword. Agatha ate dinner in the Queen's bathroom, where no one could bother her. She still had her wedding history lesson, but Pollux let her eat before it, without alerting her chambermaids, a clear breach of protocol, since they had to know where the princess was at all hours. Instead, Agatha had barreled into the kitchen herself, sending 10 cooks into coronary shock. Princess Agatha, Chef Silkema gasped, her rich brown skin flecked with flour. What's happened? Is everything all right? Can I get spaghetti with cheese for dinner? Said Agatha. Lots of cheese, tons, like enough to ruin the dish. Chef Silkema and the cooks gaped down at their finished platters of cumin-spiced coconut soup, curried chicken in a green chili sauce, potato tikis with peas and scallions, black lentil salad with salmon crumbs, and a 5-layer kulfi pistachio cake. Spaghetti with cheese? Chef Silkema croaked. To go, please, said Agatha. One of the cooks dropped his spoon. Now, as she sat dangling bare feet into a bathtub of hot water, surrounded by mirrors and peeling gold wallpaper, Agatha twirled creamy white spaghetti from a porcelain bowl into her mouth, savouring the melted mozzarella. Everyone had their comfort in times of stress. Sophie had sea salt facials, juice fasts, yoga poses, and deep tissue massages. Tedros had dumbbells and climbing ropes and anything to work up a sweat. Agatha had food. More precisely, so much food that it induced a warm, velvety coma that dulled her senses and made her unable to think beyond the gurgles of her stomach. Reaper moseyed into the bathroom and sniffed at a scrap of cheese. He gave Agatha a curdled look, as if he thought she'd outgrown all this, and shuffled away. Agatha and Tedros had certainly had fights before. Fights that made Agatha doubt whether he loved her or she loved him, or whether they even belonged together. But this wasn't a fight. She was sure Tedros loved her now, or at least as sure as she could be. Except relationships aren't just about love, Agatha realized. Relationships are about taking off the mask you wear to make someone like you and letting them see the real you, the one you hid all along, the one you never thought was good enough to find love in the first place. Tedros had helped her peel off her mask in her years at school. He'd seen her at her most vulnerable and her absolute worst, and loved her even more for it. But now it was Tedros's turn to do the same, and he was acting like most boys do when asked to face their feelings. They run. There was another thing that also made this rift different than the others, Agatha thought, spotting the pile of letters on her desk. She could see the latest one, which she'd read so many times, yet left unanswered. Darling, I know you're not reading this. I know you're not reading any of my letters. You're in love and have a wedding to plan and have no time for silly old me. But if you do read this, just know that you are in my heart always. And living without you has been far harder than I could ever admit out loud. So let me say it here. I miss you. Love, Sophie. P.S. Did you know Hort has been getting love letters from a girl? Agatha wiped her eyes. Back at school she'd always had Sophie by her side, the third point in the triangle between her and Tedros. A hollow loneliness overwhelmed her, and for the first time she saw it wasn't just her old, chivalrous prince she was yearning for, but her bold, beautiful best friend, too. A best friend she'd been avoiding, just like Tedros had been avoiding her. Now she was all alone. Outside she heard wind and rain batter the ships in the harbour. Glancing through a small window, she saw none of these ships could sail. They were broken, neglected and falling apart, like the rest of Camelot. Well, not all the ships. There was one that looked sturdy, with brilliant blue and gold finishes and milky white sails. Along the bow, she read the ship's name, Igraine. Agatha? Pollux's voice echoed outside. Shall we resume our... A loud hissing noise interrupted, followed by dog barks and crashing furniture. Pollux had met Reaper. 20 minutes later, Agatha was in the library, a 2-story collection in the gold tower that must have once been impressive, but was now a heap of cobwebs, moth-eaten books, and so much dust she could hardly breathe. There were colourful sheets slung over the bookcases and desks, as if someone had started renovating a decade ago and never got around to finishing. Agatha slouched at a desk shrouded in a purple sheet, trying to take notes as Pollux scrawled on a squeaky chalkboard, his face slashed with claw marks, suggesting he'd lost the battle with her cat. "You certainly don't want to be like Princess Kerber, who was so overwrought on her wedding day she ate an entire jar of peanut butter and vomited on her poor groom's shoes. Conversely, learn from the example of Princess Muguruza, who married a commoner, nearly prompting a revolt until she revealed her bridal gown, made entirely out of pink pearls she'd dredged from the savage sea. No one dared attack a girl who'd braved such treacherous waters, and in time every last dissenter forgave her." Agatha glazed over, her head drooping into the purple sheet. She tried to force herself awake, prying her eyes open. That's when she saw the pattern stitched on the fabric. Tiny silver, 5-pointed stars in a purple night sky, like they'd been drawn by a child. It wasn't a sheet at all. It was a cape. Agatha held in a smile, her eyes on Pollux's back. She put her nose to the purple velvet and inhaled the scent of fresh cocoa, as if someone was brewing it right now. Then there was Princess Mahalaxmi, whose father kidnapped her during the ceremony and sold her to a Never warlord in Ravenbow. Pollux rattled, which goes to show all family entanglement should be sorted before the wedding. Agatha rose from her chair, careful not to make a sound, and slipped her palms into the cape, vanishing her hands like a magic trick. Then her arms, then her shoulders. "I don't hear your pen, Agatha. This is for your own good." Pollux tutted. But by the time he turned, all that remained of his student was a single clump, somehow left behind. The moment Agatha put her face through the cape, she felt herself swaddled in velvet, then plummeting through darkness, pulses of blinding white light streaking by. She closed her eyes and let herself free fall, her arms raised, her one-shoed feet splayed, her mind untethering from her thoughts, her fears, until at last she crashed face first into something fluffy and soft and tasted sweet cloud in her mouth. Agatha opened her eyes and craned up to a purple night sky lit by thousands of silvery 5-pointed stars, as if the childish pattern on the cape in the library had come to life in heavenly dimension. The Celestium, Tedros once called it. The place where wizards go to think. Agatha rose to her knees and saw there was indeed a wizard peering thinkingly at her, sitting cross-legged on the cloud with purple silk robes, a droopy cone hat, horn-rimmed spectacles, and soft-furred violet slippers. "Merlin," she smiled. "Sorry to interrupt your lessons, dear girl, but I'm afraid we have more important ones at the moment," the old wizard said, sipping at a mug of cream-topped cocoa. "First tell me, do you want whipped cream in your chocolate, provided my hat complies? A third mug of cocoa might be too much to ask. He's been rather insubordinate of late, insisting on a minimum wage and a month of paid vacation." "A third?" asked Agatha, confused. "But there's only you and me here." "Goodness, you two really do have a hard time seeing eye to eye, don't you?" Merlin murmured. He leaned back, revealing a boy sitting next to him who'd been obscured by the wizard's profile. Tedros didn't look at Agatha. He held his own undrunk mug of chocolate heaped with cream and rainbow sprinkles, his bare legs dangling off the cloud. He wore a sleeveless white undershirt and pyjama shorts, his gold king's crown sunken into his wet hair. "Agatha and I have work to do, Merlin. Not that you would know, since you've been gone for half a year, but we're in charge of a kingdom now," Tedros said, dumping his steaming mug over the cloud. "Our coffers are empty. We have no knights. Mother and Lance are missing. There's unrest all over the woods. We don't have time for a wizard's games." "You used to share your chocolate with Agatha. Now you're wasting it." Merlin upbraided him. "I didn't ask for chocolate," said Tedros, yanking his crown tighter. "I'm too old to be bribed with sweets." "But not too old to let your dear princess go hungry?" Merlin asked. "I'm stuffed from dinner," said Agatha, trying to play both sides. "Where's the girl's cocoa?" the wizard bellowed into his hat. "You can't keep me here all night," Tedros scorned. "Air's too thin in the Celestium." "I can keep you here until you're as white-haired as me. I'll just turn you into a goldfish and put you in a bowl. Agatha can feed you," said Merlin, giving his hat a good shake. "That is, if she doesn't dump your food off a cloud." The hat spat chocolate at Merlin, who promptly sat on the hat in return. "Now, let's begin," the wizard harumphed. "Begin what?" asked Agatha. "We don't need this, Merlin," Tedros hounded. "Need what?" asked Agatha. "You need this more than your obsessive workouts and overdeveloped stomach muscles," said Merlin, sitting harder on his squirming hat. "You don't know anything about me anymore," Tedros snapped. "You disappeared when I needed you, like you always do. Haven't sent so much as a postcard in 6 months, and then drop in acting like you can help me when you don't have the faintest clue. Just go back to whatever hole you were hiding in." Because you were doing such a fine job as king without me," said the wizard. Tedros snarled. "My father was right to banish you from the castle." "Well, you're certainly seeming more and more like him each day," said Merlin. "Stop it! You're squabbling like hens, the both of you," Agatha yelled, echoing into the night. "What is this? What are we doing? Why are we here?" The two men gaped at her sheepishly. But it was the hat that spoke from beneath Merlin's rump, scowling at them all. "Couples therapy,"